My name is Rihanna McDonald with the office of Congressman Greg Steube in Florida's 17th District. I am here today with United States Army Vietnam combat veteran Paul Pelleschi for the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. We are currently at our Sarasota, Florida office, and we are ready to conduct today's interview. Paul, can you start with where you're from and who your parents are?
Originally, I was from Paterson, New Jersey. I was born in 1947. My father was Dominic Pelleschi. He was a machinist for Curtiss Wright. He was also a veteran of World War II. He was in the Army Air Corps, which then later became the Air Force. So he was stationed in Burma and then in Calcutta, India. My mother was Anna Cataldi Pelleschi. She was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And she was a dietitian for the Paterson school system, Central High School.
Did you have any siblings?
No, I was an only child. I always say my parents had perfection, and they decided they would stop with one.
What schools did you attend growing up?
I went to PS 15, which was in the People's Park section of Paterson, New Jersey, and then East Side High School, which was, there were several high schools in Paterson. It was a large city in New Jersey.
And did you work at any point during junior high or high school?
We didn't have the junior high system. We went right from grammar school into high school. In my senior year, I was a delivery boy for a meat market, so I did that to earn some money. And then in my senior year also, I was accepted into a secondary, I started my secondary education for electronics, which turned out to be quite helpful in later years. And then I went to work for General Instrument as a line troubleshooter for them, but I was drafted at that point.
Okay, you were drafted, and how old were you?
I was 19 years old when I was drafted in 1966.
Okay. Did you have any friends or family members or even classmates who served with you in Vietnam, and were they also drafted?
Well, it was kind of unique. My cousin James and I were drafted on the exact same day.
Wow.
So when we went to the induction center for our final physical before they accepted us, James and I were the first 8 to take the oath of enlisting. And before we did that, a rather large Marine sergeant came in and said he needed 7 volunteers to go into the Marines. None of us volunteered. So he just counted. He went 1, 2, 3, 4, and went to 7. Jim was 7th. I was 8th. So he went into the Marines. That's the last I saw him for till we were both out of the military. And I went into the Army.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Definitely. Thank God you were number 8, right?
That's right. I wanted to be in the Army.
So where did you go to receive your training, and did you think it was adequate for your eventual mission in Vietnam?
Well, what happened was Fort Dix was full. They couldn't take any more. That was where you went in New Jersey when you were drafted. They were full. They couldn't take any more people in for basic training. So we were put on a plane and sent to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which was the home of the 101st Airborne. And that's where we took our basics. So we had the normal basics. There was a few glitches there. They were not prepared to do basic training since World War II. And they did not have barracks facilities. So they put us in the World War II barracks, which were old wooden barracks, coal fire boilers for heat and hot water. But that's where I took my basic training. It was 8 weeks. We learned all the basics that we needed to learn. And then from there we did, several people were shipped out, but we were basically volunteered to go into the 101st Airborne. So that was my secondary training. I was trained as an infantryman, but I broke my hand in jump school. So I couldn't jump, I couldn't finish the training. And that's how I ended up in my final unit, which was the 2nd Battalion, 11th Artillery.
Man, okay. So tell me about how you transitioned from your training to Vietnam. What was that experience?
Well, what happened was, because I was trained as an infantryman, when I got to the 2nd 11th Artillery, I had no training. I did not know anything about artillery. So all my training was on the job. I had to learn. All the other people that were in my unit, they were trained as artillery people. I didn't have any of that. So I had to be taught on the job. When I got to the barracks in Fort Campbell, there was nobody there. I had to go from building to building to find someone, and I finally found a first lieutenant in one of the barracks. He was in the headquarters barracks. And when he looked at my test scores, now I was trained in electronics to be a computer, he asked me if I wanted to change my MOS. Not knowing a lot about the military, he said he wanted to make me put me in fire direction control because of my mathematics and my secondary education. So I said, okay. I didn't know anything. I really didn't know what I was volunteering for. And so I sat in the barracks for a whole week because they were out being trained. I don't know who knew or how much they knew, but they were being trained to go to Vietnam. Unfortunately, the way they trained us was for World War II, where there was a definite line. So we were trained that way. But when we shipped out to Vietnam, we went out as a unit. We were not replacements. So there was an entire unit of us. We were flown to Oakland, and we boarded a ship there, the USNS Patrick, where we slept 7 deep in the hole for 18 days until we got to Okinawa. They let us off for really just to get us off the boat. And then we got back on, and then 4 more days to actually get to Vietnam. So that was, and all while we were doing that, we did training, we did physical fitness on the boat. We continued to do training in fire direction control. Obviously, we had no artillery pieces, but we did mock firings. And then when we got to Vietnam, it was in the middle of the night. And 4 of us went up on deck, and there was a light show going on. There was tracers going everywhere. There was flashes. It was just unbelievable. We looked at each other and said, what have we done? What have we got ourselves into? Yeah. So that was my introduction to Vietnam.
Wow.
And then we went on, we got off the ship, we went on to LSTs, landing ship transports. It's what you see in all the movies where the front comes down. That's what we got on, and we went ashore that way. Of course, we weren't under fire. I can't imagine what that would be like. But that's how we got in, and then we were flown to our first base, which was Phu Loy. And that's where we all came together, got all of our equipment, and we started.
Wow.
When we were on the ship, it wasn't too bad because we were still over water, but you could get a sense of how hot it was going to be. When we got on land, it was unbearably hot. We weren't used to it. It took a while for us to acclimatize to that. I don't know that you ever really do, because it's just terribly hot. There was a definite odor. I don't know whether it was because of the jungle or the amount of bombs that they dropped, or just general war odors that was definitely in the country. So you kind of didn't understand what was going on. But all of the creature comforts went away real quick when we got to our first. We did have tents that we slept in. We had a mess hall. it was kind of, I don't want to say it was easy, but it was not, we were not in the jungles. So the first couple of months for us were getting used to shooting. See, we were not trained to shoot 360 degrees. We also were like behind. Now we were right in the middle of it. There was no safe places in Vietnam because you were always surrounded by, not necessarily by the enemy, but there was places where it wasn't secure.
Right.
So when we went to Phu Loy, they then started to break us up. So for the first several months, we would be in base camps that were small little encampments where we could put 6 artillery pieces. We were no longer 18 guns altogether. We were in a number of different places. But when I left Phu Loy, I was transferred out to a town called Go Ha, which was on the Cambodian border. And that's where we started to really learn what was going to happen, what was our responsibilities, and what we were going to be doing from then on. And it kind of, all of our training kind of, at that point, started to be really on the job for Vietnam. We were trained, we knew what we were doing, but now it took a sense of urgency because we were now supporting ground troops all over.
Okay. So what were your living conditions like?
Well, when we were in a major base camp, they weren't bad. We were in tents, large, I don't remember the size of them. They were large tents with maybe 10 or 15 guys could sleep in. They were surrounded by bunkers. When we left the large base camps, which then we would go into 2-man bunkers, sometimes 4-man bunkers, we would be self-contained at that point, and we did our own security. We might have units assigned to us. In Go Ha, we had some what they called dust-offs. They were actually a tank bed that they removed and put 40 millimeter cannons on. They were twin 40 millimeter cannons, so they helped do security for us. But you were now in blackout conditions, which is kind of ironic. You have an artillery piece, a 155, shooting 14 pounds of black powder. It gives off quite the flash. So trying to hide and be in blackout was kind of useless. So they always knew where we were. We couldn't hide.
Right.
But the living conditions still were pretty decent. We only went by trucks. We had roads wherever we went. So we had supplies. We even had ice at times. That we would go to the villages and we could get a block of ice for about equivalent to 10 cents American. And so we had cold drinks on occasion. We had ice. The mess halls were pretty functional. They actually did that. And then all of that changed.
Yeah.
What happened was they decided that they needed heavy artillery elsewhere where there were no roads. And we were told that they were going to pick us up with helicopters. Now, there was no helicopters in Vietnam that could pick up an 18,000-pound gun. It was 22 feet long, shot 155 millimeter shells. They weighed 100 pounds each. 14 pounds of powder for the maximum firing range. So there was a lot of details that had to be worked out. What we didn't know was they were going to bring in what I call the flying cranes. They were CH-54 helicopters. They had no body to them. It was just a cockpit and then a place for the flight engineer. And it was huge. And they've picked us up. We were the first air mobile 155s ever. So once they found out they could pick us up and take us, from that point, we didn't need roads. So what they would do is they would clear the top of a mountain, or a jungle, and they would drop us in. And from that point on, I only remember being, in fact, they moved to another base camp. We moved up north to a base called Duck Foe. I was out on an operation with Sea Battery. I was assigned to headquarters, but every time Sea Battery went out on an operation, they sent me with them because we were so short of manpower that I would go out with them, and that was my job. When we left the top of a mountain, the next time we went was to Duck Foe. I didn't even know where we were. I had never been there, so they flew us in, and then that's how I got reassigned back to headquarters for a short period of time. So that's pretty much how we functioned. They would pick up anywhere from 2 guns to 3 guns. There was on occasion later on where they picked up 1 gun at a time, and we would support all the different operations. What's interesting is we never, at the time, we really never knew where we were. Even though we had maps, we would know we would be on the top of hill 937. We would be on the hill of 834. That was the elevation point of that mountaintop. They never had names. Later on, they started naming them just to clarify where people were so they could tell where the different units were. Mm-hmm. But that's how we started. And it changed all of our training changed. All of our needs changed. We had no base camp. Water was flown into us. And that was one of the critical things that our artillery needed. We could not fire without water. They had to swab the barrels every time they shot. They had to fly in the artillery, the rounds and the powder, our food. So we now became very dependent on other organizations.
What other organizations?
Well, we had to depend on, in some cases, the Air Force to fly in
supplies.
Supplies, ammunition was flown in by helicopter. We had to count on see our transport, our battery of our service battery didn't fly out with us. They had to go get the ammunition, bring them somewhere. They had to go get the food, bring them somewhere. Our mess halls had to prepare food elsewhere and then fly them into us. And you got it. We got one hot meal just about every day. That usually was dinner time. Other than that, we ate sea rations. So all of that had to be flown into us. So there was other organizations within the Army that would do that. Our other battery, our other members of our batteries had to make sure we had everything we needed as quickly as possible. And sometimes it took a while for them to do that.
Okay, so speaking of sea rations, which they're called MREs today, what was your favorite sea ration?
I could tell you, well, my favorite was anything that had not fresh, but had canned fruit in it.
Okay.
So that was everybody's favorite. The worst was scrambled eggs and ham in a can. And some weird combinations. They had instead of spaghetti and meatballs, they had spaghetti and hot dogs, hot dog chunks. You had meatballs and franks, meatballs and beans. So it was all, the combinations didn't make sense. But if you were lucky enough, you got a can of cookies. They were cream-filled cookies, or you've got, like I said, fruit. So they were all different. They had all different combinations. They also had a package of cigarettes in them, a 4-pack or 5-pack of box of cigarettes. They had some hard candies. Chiclets. They always had chiclets in them.
What's chiclets?
Chiclet was a hard-covered, candy-covered gum.
Oh, okay.
You had toilet paper. You had matches, we had jungle matches. They were damp-proof, supposedly damp-proof matches, but most of us carried a lighter. uh, And when we ran out of lighter fluid, we used gasoline out of one of the vehicles. Our unit always had to have electricity, so we could be in a bunker and compute the data that had to be put on the gun. That was my job.
Okay. And did your job change while you were in Vietnam?
The job didn't change, but our responsibilities did.
In what way?
Well, when we were under ground attack and the artillery was now shooting direct fire, normally you shoot artillery, you shoot up in the air and you shoot at a target. You get references from a forward observer. He tells you which way he wants you to move the rounds. When we were under ground attack, the guns were now leveled and they were shooting like you would shoot a rifle. So they didn't need fire direction control. They were on their own. So now our responsibility would be to go out and support our perimeter, or in some cases stay in our bunkers and support if we were going to be overrun. We would then hunker down and do what we could to expel the enemy at that point, the VC or the MVA. There was times when I may not have been on duty, but I would go out and help them. I didn't know how to fire the gun, but I could carry ammo. I could help them load it on a tray. They had a tray that they put up. I could help them ram the round in. So I did that whenever I could, but mostly my responsibility was to help to compute the data. But it was exhausting. I mean, we call them gun buddies. That's because they were always humping ammo. So we called them gun buddies. So there was times when we shot continuously for hours, they were exhausted. So when we could, we would go out and support them. So we still did perimeter duty. I helped them whenever I could. When we got supplies in, helped them move the supply to secure areas. So we did all those things. Uh, you did what you had to do to help everybody complete their mission.
Right. So, were you able to communicate with your family or friends back home at all?
We communicated via mail. Mail was very important. That was one thing you didn't fool with, was our mail. It didn't come every day. It came when it could catch up to us, because if we moved, normally our mail was mailed to an APO, and I'm assuming they still do that. They do it to a clearinghouse, and then that was sent overseas. And I don't really know the process, but eventually it would catch up to you. It would take several weeks for it to catch it to your base camp. But now, if we were out on an operation and they had room on a helicopter, when they brought us supplies, they would bring us mail. So that was our lifeline. That's how we kept in touch. That's how we communicated back.
Okay. And
Letters only required the word free. Where the stamp goes today,
yeah.
all we had to do was write free,
Oh, that's
and that was our stamp. I don't remember how, but I don't remember how we got paper and pen. We always had pencils and pens, but I don't remember how we got paper and envelopes. I just don't remember that. We always had them. I don't know how we got them.
Okay, and you, thankfully, you were able to capture a lot of pictures during your time in Vietnam. How did that come about?
I had a 35 millimeter camera. It was the old slide camera. It was a fairly inexpensive one. And I had that as a civilian. And I took it in the military with me. I had it as part of my personal possessions after basic training. So it went overseas with me. Well, unfortunately, it didn't last long because of the conditions over there, the dust, the rain, the humidity. Um, so when someone there was, for lack of a better word, PXs and the major, like Da Nang, Tay Ninh, Long Binh, they had actually what was called a PX. So they had things you could buy. And when somebody was going on leave, I would give them money and say, buy me a 35 millimeter camera. I went through 3 35 millimeter cameras, the first one and then 2 more. The third one finally made it home with me. and I went through two Super 8. I had somebody buy me a movie camera. And that's why I have some movie footage of what we did. Uh, but the equipment didn't last long. It's a very harsh environment from heat, rain, dust. It was a dirty place. Uh,
What was the morale at the time that you were there?
I don't. You got into a groove. Um, we did our job. It was long hours. I mean, there was days when you went 24 hours on duty because of the conditions of whatever operations you were on. Um, but I don't know that the morale was a problem as much as just the exhaustion, because like I say, the rounds were 97 pounds. The fuses, when you put them together, they were heavy. It was a lot of strenuous work. The guns weighed 18,000 pounds. So when you had to move them on the top of a
Took a
mountain,
lot.
what they would do, what I remember several times that I helped, is they would put the heaviest guy on the barrel of the gun to make a counterbalance, and then they would move it that way. In the middle of the night, they were in their underwear doing it because when a mission would come in, everybody got up. So it was more exhaustion than I'd say morale. Yeah, you have an attitude.
Already, the Vietnam War had already started. What was your opinion about the war being drafted into it?
I don't know that I had really an opinion. I didn't know what I was getting. I was 18, or I was 19 years old. My father was in the military. I had pictures of him. He never really talked about what he did. And I had several uncles that were in the military. Um, in the beginning, I think I thought it was just whatever was going to happen happened. I think most of the 19 and 20-year-olds thought nothing's going to happen to me.
So you think that was the attitude for the young people being drafted?
Yeah, and then when we finally started taking some casualties, I think a lot of it. I don't know that we were afraid. I think reality started to set in that this was not. I mean, even the first time we got mortared, it wasn't a big deal. They shot a couple of mortars at us. We all hunkered down in bunkers, but it wasn't a big deal until we actually started getting. It started to repeat itself over and over again. We're
So,
certainly glad to come home.
amen. So, in experiencing, you know, combat, in that way, did that change your perception of the war?
Uh, what changed?
Once the reality set in?
What changed was uh, it became it, it became almost surreal at times. There was times when you couldn't really believe what was going on. Um, there was not panic, but there was a lot of adrenaline. Um, you're just doing a job, and then something changes, and your adrenaline flow becomes so great that you're almost moving in slow motion.
Okay.
I don't know that. uh, See, I was there in 1966 and 67. That's during the buildup. So the real commotion at home hadn't started. It was there, but not what it finally became in later years. I think that affected me more than than being there. Uh, We weren't. We ran a gauntlet coming home. I mean, we're very proud of what we did and what we accomplished. And there was some things that were not very nice that we did, but we managed to get around. There was restrictions in the war. That's some of the restrictions you have to question. Uh, for example, when we were in Godaha, we were not allowed to shoot into Cambodia. We could only shoot in Vietnam. We were only several miles uh, off the Cambodian border. And what would happen is the Viet Cong would come down through Laos and Cambodia. Their supplies, their military would come down through there. Well, we couldn't shoot at them, and they would get right on the border and wait till nightfall, and then come in and then go after all of the Army and the Marines that we had. So it was very frustrating. What we did was we had, and I won't mention his name, we had an officer who decided that we were going to change our maps. We would turn our maps 180 degrees out, because when we shoot, we would put pinholes in the maps and in the graphs that we would do. So we changed them so that they were 180 out. So all the pinholes, when you turn the map right side, would be in Vietnam. Well, we decided it was time to stop it, and then they stopped coming down and coming in. So we did things like that that were not accepted. They were not allowed. We hid them.
Mhm.
But it became there were no rules in war. Not that we did anything evil, but we did things to protect ourselves that were not part of what the military would accept as rules of war.
Okay. So speaking of things that were unacceptable, the Department of Defense, they publicized a report in, I think, 1971 about the drug use of service members in Vietnam. Did you witness any of that?
We had some. We did not understand. It grew everywhere in Vietnam. It was readily available.
And when you say it, what specific?
Marijuana.
Okay.
It grew wild. We did not have a lot then. Um, we first of all, we had to be sharp all the time. So if we couldn't trust somebody that was high in drugs. So it wasn't tolerated when we were there. So there was minimal. It became later on that it got kind of out of hand.
Mhm.
But we had an officer that in the later years that decided he was going to fix it, and he did.
Okay. Um, so Agent Orange was a tactical herbicide used by the United States military in Vietnam for controlling the vegetation, and it had a harmful impact on the Vietnamese and Americans for several generations in some more severe cases. What are your opinions on Agent Orange?
We had no idea. We knew it was defoliant. I have a picture, and one of my slides shows a gentleman named Paul Fast. He was doing his laundry in a 55-gallon drum that was cut in half, and it was an Agent Orange barrel. So we didn't know. Nobody told us. We had no idea what it was. The long term effects were going to be. I have a picture also of us when we landed on the top of one mountain. It was all lush grass, and several days later, when we left, it was all brown. Everything was dead. So it killed everything. Well, we didn't know. Nobody told us. So far, I'm lucky. I've only had a little bit of problems with it, uh, but other members of my unit are suffered badly. I have a cousin it's rotting his bones out. He has a lot of problems with it. So Agent Orange was nasty. They didn't tell us about it. They gave us, whether our officers knew or not, I doubt it. But uh, and we had to. It wasn't so much what it did to us; it's that they hid it. I think that's the big thing, and never acknowledge it without really getting some extreme pressure from outside.
So, you also served during a time where the Civil Rights Act was like, was the thing to talk about, and that was what society was adjusting to. Did you ever witness anything racial in Vietnam?
You know, maybe I was naive, but I never saw it.
There.
I never saw it. So I don't. The unit I was in, even the section I was in, um, we had two sergeants that were black. We had one chart operator. We had our communications people. So we were very integrated. Uh, you know, to be honest with you, I didn't notice. You counted so much on the person next to you to do his job. I never, until somebody pointed out when they saw my video and they said, I can't get over how close you guys were. And it's because we needed each other desperately. So if it was there, I never saw it.
Okay.
And I mean, when we got care packages, we shared it with everybody. It did. So I don't, I, I just never saw it. I never experienced it. Um, it was just there. There was a gentleman. His name was Wallace Collins. He's since passed away. He had the greatest smile, even in the thick of things. He would light up the room with his smile. And when we had our first reunion, he walked in the room. This was 45 years later. He walked in the room and I knew him right away by his smile.
So speaking of closeness and reunions, tell me about the friends that you made and that you kept.
We were very close because we went over as a unit. We trained together in, like I say, in Fort Campbell. But because of what developed, how when we became air mobile, we were always with the officers. The officers were always with us. The guns were always a unit. They you didn't you never went out with somebody else. I did because of what my job requirements were, but the unit stayed together, so they became very close. That when we got together, um, even in the base camps, we were always a unit. We never separated. So we became very tight. Even with our officers, they were still sir. Uh, We sergeants were always sergeants. We never addressed them any other way. It was, and I didn't realize until years later when we tried to find some of our unit, some of our friends, that uh, we didn't know their first name because on your name tag it only had your last name. So the only people that I really knew their first names was people that I was extremely close with. I knew their first names, but even the other people in my section, I didn't know their first name. So when we tried to find them for the reunion, it was very difficult.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of phone calls to people that may have had the right name, but it wasn't the right person. So but because we were always together, even after we left, uh, the replacements came in, they were very tight because we were always together. We had to be because we all had very specific functions and we always had to rely on the person next to us. So
And earlier in the interview, you mentioned that there were some casualties. So with that in mind, have you been able to visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in DC?
no, I've toyed with it, but no, I have not. In fact, the display that I have of our unit, the photographs that were taken, one of the lieutenants, I asked him if he could get, because I wanted to do a memorial to them. That display is to them,
Right.
28 that we lost. He went and took the picture. So I didn't even go there for that. I had somebody else do that for me. He did a wonderful job of capturing all 28 of the men that we lost.
Yeah. That's beautiful that you guys put that together and you're still displaying it and sharing it.
I take it anywhere that I'm invited. I'm so proud of all the things that we did, that we overcame. Uh, um, I also have the memories of this. We shot down. We shot down a plane with our artillery. Uh, I was the one that gave the command to fire. I looked out the bunker window. That was when we were in a special forces camp and saw that caribou crash. Um, there's not always good things that you remember, even other than combat. There's other things that happen that you just say it's senseless. Why did that happen? And they just do.
So, what does national holidays like Memorial Day do to you?
They're very somber. Memorial Day is Veterans Day is more uh, remembering all the people that I still communicate with. We do still. I don't communicate with as many as I used to. Uh, we have people move. You lose their phone numbers. They don't tell you that they moved. Life goes on. But we always remember the 28th. So Memorial Day, I always have a display up somewhere. Uh, this last time it was in uh, a VFW hall where they had a Medal of Honor winner uh, give a speech. My display was there. Um, I've done that on Veterans Day. I have it somewhere. During the pandemic, I had it in my garage, and I had people come to my garage to see it, my neighbors and so forth. So I tried to make sure that our memory stays alive, that their memory stays alive. Um, we just won't forget them.
Did you have any difficulties adjusting to society after coming back from Vietnam? And can you share any combat related injuries that you sustained?
I was never wounded. Uh, uh, and coming back, see, I thought I was normal when I came back. Um, I found out many years later from my wife that she had a terrible time with me. Uh, that that I she tells a story that where there was a backfire outside of our apartment, and I made her crawl across the floor. I just said, "No, you don't stand up in the window when you hear noise like that." So yeah, that was there. Um, it took a while to. I mean, you have to understand that your language in combat is quite rough, and it took me a while to calm down and get a hold of to re-educate myself to what was socially acceptable. Um, you live like that for a year. I was there a year and 14 days. I extended so I got an early out. So I did not want to go to another base when I came back from Vietnam, and that was the policy then. If you had less than 90 days, they just discharged you. So yeah, it was tough. It was a little, like I say, I didn't realize it how rough I was. But I found out later from my wife that I had a tough time adjusting. You did that. It's just normal. You're coming from a 2 year experience that was different.
What do you or what do we need to remember about the war in America's involvement?
They asked us to do a lot of different stuff. We overcame a lot. Um, I think in the beginning we were ill prepared. Uh, it took a long time for us to get to what I'll call the groove that we needed to do. Uh, but in all fairness, there was no way until you're in a jungle. Um, there's no way you can simulate it. But we were not prepared. Our training, and I'm not saying our training was bad. It's just that it was not. It did not prepare us for Vietnam. It did not prepare us for what we would have to do. I don't. I don't know how I would have done it differently. It's just it was a different war. Uh, we weren't used to clearing houses. We weren't used to. I mean, and in every war, there's things that you're just not prepared for.
So, Mr. Pelleschi, you have given your time to other interviewers, and it's obviously very important for you to share your story and everyone else's stories. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to ask you, why did you agree to do this interview for the Veterans History Project?
What happened was I did a radio, iHeart radio interview, and both Amanda and James, who are ex-military, uh, they kind of pushed me to do it. Uh, and I kind of said, you know what, it's the right thing to do now because every day there's less and less of us. We're at that age. And the stories need to be told. I felt we weren't appreciated when we came home. It was just the environment. It was a very unpopular war, but it's time to know what we did, what we were asked to do, um, and how we did it. A lot of things we're not prepared for. We weren't prepared to be air mobile, but the sergeants made the harnesses. They got us the helicopters, and we did it. Uh, and every operation we did was the same thing.
What message would you like to close your interview with?
I don't know that I have a message. I'm just my message is I'm proud of what we did. I'm proud of the men that I served with. That was a privilege. There was some really great men. We had wonderful officers. They were with us all the time. They didn't stay behind. We had sergeants that were right alongside of us. So there was no, they always say rank has its privilege. Well, it had no privilege in Vietnam. They were one of us. I guess that's my message is that we were very privileged to have the people that we had. We were the right people for the right time. Somebody else said that, but I'm going to use his phrase.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your service and for your time today for Congressman Steube's Veterans History Project.
It was an honor.